I have the template open. That's a downloadable resource in this class called the Isometric Grid.ai. It's an Illustrator file, and it's got two simple layers. It's got a locked isometric grid layer, and it's got another layer where you can put your design either on top or on the bottom. So sometimes it's helpful to change that position. So in this case, I'm going to drag this layer 2 right below the isometric grid. So anything I design, I will always see the grid on top, so I can kind of see what direction I need to go in. So this is going to be the design layer. And for this project, we're going to cheat a lot. And we're going to use the 3D tools in Adobe Illustrator to create the majority of the objects you see in the project. But let's first start out with doing a little manual work. We're going to create our base layer. And it's going to be a very simple flat box. So let's go ahead and zoom in, kind of create our base layer. We're going to get the pen tool. And you'll notice with this grid, you can go up to view. And if you want to turn on smart guides, it can be very helpful in terms of helping you snap to certain parts of the grid. So we're going to turn smart guides on. We're just kind of doing a basic square. Of course, we can always change this with the direct selection tool. Flip that to a fill. We can make this any size we want. It kind of nicely snaps for us. And let's make that a different color so we can see our grid underneath. So we're just making it a nice. So this is going to be our base color, or our base shade. So now we need to draw the 3D elements. We're just going to do a very small little platform. So we're going to get the pen tool, we're going to zoom in on this one, and we're going to do this halfway. We don't want to have it the full thickness. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to double click, and this is going to be, we're going to have a direct lighting source on the top. So our top, isometric top is going to be the brightest. That means our isometric left is going to be kind of that middle ground shade. So we're going to double click our color swatch, and let's just make it just a little bit darker. So it'll add a little bit of depth and dimension. Let's do the same thing with the other side. So this is isometric right. This is going to be our darkest shade. So let's double click and go further down and add a little darkness to that. So now we have 3 different shades, and we can always toggle off our grid to kind of see what we have. So you can see our light source is coming down, and we have a darker shade and then kind of that middle shade to the left. You can always add a gradient to this to add even more highlights and shadows. So let's make this a simple gradient. We're going to have kind of the light source coming from the top, so we're going to go this all the way down. And let's create our shades. We can double click the brightest. Go ahead and make it our top shade. And we could even make this brighter too. So why don't we make the darker shade the lightest and make this even lighter than our original highlight. So we're just going to double click. It just adds a little pop of dimension. So you can see how it adds a richness by adding that radial gradient. So now we have our base layer here. So just toggling off our isometric grid layer, which is locked, and going back to my design layer, let's go ahead and see if we can't create a iPad base. So we're going to cheat a little bit and use the 3D tools here. So let's do the rounded rectangle tool. We're just going to do an iPad, and let's make this black for right now. Let's go up to our swatches and make it a solid color, maybe like a gray. And we don't need to have this big, huge corner, so let's extend that out. Make it just a slightly rounded rectangle. So this is how easy it is to create kind of realistic 3D isometric designs. Instead of hand drawing all of this, which you can do just by doing how we did the base layer but adding layer upon layer, we can go up to Effect, 3D, Extrude, and Bevel. So you'll notice you can manually move this around, and we can go down and click on Preview, and you can kind of manually do this. And this is really hard to get the right match manually. So that's why they have some preset custom rotation positions. And they happen to have all the isometric ones. So what we want to do is we want to have it face, we can do it either way. We can have it do an isometric left, an isometric right, an isometric top, and have it be on the bottom like you saw the iPhone on the example. That would be an isometric top. And then an isometric bottom, so it's going to show the bottom. We are going to do an isometric right. So we're going to do it just like the example we saw. And you'll notice a couple things. You'll notice the depth here is pretty thick. That's a really thick iPad. That might be the iPad 1 where it was super duper thick. Well, we need to reduce the depth. So we're going to go to this extrude depth option and let's reduce it down quite a bit. Let's try 20. And let's say I pressed enter and I wasn't ready and I want to go back and change it again. You could just go into your properties panel and you'll see your effects right down here. You could just double click that and get right back into your settings and click on preview. So let's try a little thinner. Let's try 14. That's getting really close. Let's just continue to trial and error. That's pretty good. I'm trying to go for the iPad Pro version, which has a pretty thin bezel. So here's what's really neat about using the shading. And we're going to be using plastic shading just because it's going to add more realistic highlights and brightness to the edges of our iPad. So let's click on plastic shading. And this is where the magic happens. This is your lighting source. So we're going to kind of have a top lighting source, but we really kind of want to test out and see what would look really good. So let's continue to move this more toward the center. So we're going to move this around until I can see the edges. I want to have this nice highlight right there in the corner to make it look like the light's coming that way. And let's say it's kind of dark and you really want that to come out more. You can increase the ambient light to make it a little bit lighter overall. You can also increase the highlight intensity. So that's going to increase the intensity of the highlight. And also highlight size. So these are three things that you can manipulate to kind of get that right brightness setting for you. All right, so these are the settings that I'm going to be happy with. Let me play around with the location of the light source just a little bit. See how I do a front light source? It's all flat. You don't get any of the highlights on the edges. Okay, let's click on OK. We can always change the shade. And we can always go in our layers and toggle this off to get a better idea of what it's really looking like. And at any time, this is the original shape. So this is basically the rounded rectangle tool. And we can manipulate this at any time and it'll automatically apply the 3D effect to it. So for example, I can change the roundness and it's going to automatically update for me. And I can also continue to change the color, make it brighter overall if I wanted to. So there's the base of our iPad. We can toggle on our isometric grid and line this up where we'd like to line it up on the grid. Just lining the corners up just to kind of get a nice center. And I might want to push it a little bit backward because I want to put some people and some other things happening here. And I can change this at any time. And there is our little iPad.